Hello Year 7 and welcome to your next geography lesson. To begin with, I'd like you to see how much you can remember from previous lessons, or the last lesson in fact. So could you answer the 4 questions on the screen? You can do that, as it says in the back of your book, bit of scrap paper somewhere away from your lessons, but don't cheat and look. This is from memory and we'll go through the answers in 4 or 5 minutes. Pause now. Okay, so answers. The salt is considered to be white gold because of the value that it can sell for. White because of the color of salt, and gold, likening it to gold, which, as you probably are aware and should be aware, is very expensive. Number 2, working conditions for the miners are tough due to the extreme heat, which means that they have to start work early in the morning. The work is often very hard and they have no mechanical support. They're doing everything by hand. And they have to use camels to transport the salt, as the region is so remote. The salt miners have to face temperatures in excess of 50 degrees Celsius, very, very hot. And many of the Afari people become salt miners because of the amount of money that they can earn to support their family, and also because in the region there is a lack of other work. This is one of the few types of work that they can do. So check through that, make any corrections you need to, and then we'll move on to the next slide. Okay, so if you could copy the title on the screen, How is the Horn of Africa Developing? Don't forget to write the date, underline the title, question mark at the end, and notice capital H and A for Horn and Africa. Read through the objectives, make sure you have all the equipment you need. Spend 1 minute doing all of that, and we'll get on with the rest of the lesson. Pause now. Okay, so a few key terms to begin with. 1 or 2 of them are going to be hopefully fairly obvious to you. Some others you might or might not know. So on the left, you have the list of key terms from economic development all the way down to GDP. And on the right, you have your definitions. Now, they're not matched up at the moment, so could you please match them up? The way you can write that out is by writing economic development means, and then whatever you think the answer is, and so on through all 5. So pause the video now and write down those. Okay, double check these answers for me. Economic development means when a country gets richer and people's lives improve. Population means how many people live somewhere. Life expectancy means how long people live for. Safe water means water that will not hurt you. And GDP means how much money a country makes. If you've got any of those incorrect, please correct them now so that you can revise from these words and use them in the rest of this lesson accurately. Pause now. Okay, I'd like you to have a look through this data table in front of you. We're going to use data today to try and work out how developed the Horn of Africa is, and specifically which countries within it are more or less developed than the other countries. So remember, development means how rich a country is and how good the lives of its people are. And we can measure that in many, many different ways. So in the first row, we have the population of each country, measured in millions. So Djibouti has a population of 0.9 million people, or 900,000. Somalia, 9.8 million, and all the way up to the top of Ethiopia with 85 million people. We have by far the massive population in Ethiopia. On the right, we've got a column for the UK. This is to help you compare to the other countries. So Ethiopia has a population that's greater than, quite a lot greater than the UK, whereas the other 3 countries, their populations are a lot lower. Then we look at the percentage aged 14 or under. Now, in some cases, that can be used as to be helpful when it comes to development, but today we're not going to be using that so much. So skim it over, have a look at it. You'll notice that all the countries are a lot higher than the UK. A lot more children there than there are in the UK as a percentage of the whole population. Next, we have the percentage living in towns or cities, and you'll notice again, most of the countries are below the UK, except for Djibouti. Djibouti isn't far off the UK. Life expectancy. Now, this is one that we are really going to focus on today. This is a very, very useful one. So life expectancy is how long people live for. Notice big differences between the UK and the 4 countries of the Horn of Africa, but also notice Somalia, considerably lower than the rest. Only 51 on average people born today in Somalia will live to their 51st birthday on average. We have the percentage of people who have access to safe water, clean water, water that's not going to harm them. Again, really useful as a measure of how developed a country is. The UK, 100%. Djibouti, 92%. Look at Somalia, 29%. Could that be a reason why their life expectancy is so low? Well, definitely one reason. The next one, the percentage of workers who are farmers. Notice UK 1.4, very, very small. Djibouti 30%, a lot greater than us, but certainly not 80, 85, 71 like the other three countries. And generally, the more developed a country is, the fewer people working as farmers there are. So any country like Ethiopia with 85%, well, that's a bit of evidence that maybe it's not as developed as some of the other countries below it. And then finally, the GDP per person, how much money the country makes in a year. Another good indicator of development. None of these should be used on their own, by the way. You should always look at all of them together to try and build a picture, because there are some countries in the world with very high GDP, but actually their life expectancies are quite low. The access to safe water is quite low, because a lot of that money ends up in the pockets of just a few people. So we need to be careful looking at just one. So when you come to the end of the lesson and I ask you to make a decision on which country out of the four in the Horn of Africa is the most developed, you need to look at more than just one measure of development. So anyway, GDP per person, back to that. The UK, $37,500 per person per year. Djibouti, which so far in some ways has been sort of similar or close to the UK, 2,700, significantly lower. Look at Somalia again, only $600. Now, this doesn't mean income. This isn't how much someone will earn in a year, but it certainly means with that level of difference between the numbers that the people in all four of those countries, and especially Somalia, especially Eritrea, they're going to be earning generally a lot lower than the UK, because earnings that people make, well, that does contribute towards the GDP. So have a quick look over that again. You're going to need to come back to this slide to answer the next few questions on the next slide. And hopefully there'll be a copy of this in class charts as well if you need it as a PDF. Let's move on. Okay, so here's some questions for you. 5 questions based on GDP. So all you need to look at is the GDP row. You've got some mathematical questions here. We're doing some data analysis. Now the word range and the word mean are two that you may need to be reminded of. They're at the bottom. If you're unsure on how to do these any further, go and ask someone at home. If that's still not helpful, give your teacher an email and we'll be more than happy to help you out, reminding you what those words mean. But by year 7, you should absolutely know what those two terms mean. You'll have done those two terms even in previous schools. So get cracking with those 5 questions, and we're going to move on to the next set of questions once you've finished those. So pause now and wait for the next set. Okay, next 2 questions about life expectancy. Give these a go, pause the video, and then some more questions coming up when you've done that. Okay, another 2 questions. This is about the percentage of urban population. Get cracking with those 2. And a final question, or final 2 questions, sorry, with a challenge there as well as technically number 11. Answer those now. Okay, so some answers for you. The country with the highest GDP in the Horn of Africa is Djibouti, and the country with the lowest GDP is Somalia. The range of GDP is $2,100, and the mean GDP is $1,325. And as a challenge, the range between the Horn's mean GDP and the UK's is 36,175. Huge, huge difference. Number 6, all countries in the Horn of Africa have life expectancy less than 65 years. And number 7, the difference between Djibouti and the UK is 18 years, Eritrea and the UK 17, Ethiopia and the UK 20, and Somalia and the UK 29 years. That is a staggeringly large difference. Number 8, Djibouti has the highest percentage for urban population, and the difference is 3%. So a small difference there, not very much. Number 10, Djibouti has the highest access to clean water. And finally, the range between this and the lowest is 61%, another big difference. So what have we highlighted there in answering all these questions? Well, on the whole, the Horn of Africa has a fairly low level of development, certainly compared to somewhere like the UK. However, within the region itself, there are also big differences. And don't forget, at the end of the lesson, I'm going to be asking you to decide which of these countries you think is the highest and the most developed. And that's going to be based on the data. So actually, you should all come to the same answer. For now, let's move on. Okay, read through the following. I'll read it with you. So, how are the countries of the Horn doing? Today, the countries of the Horn of Africa are not well off. You can tell from the low GDP per person values. There are many causes of poverty. You will look at them later in your course. But for these countries, one factor is the years of conflict they have suffered. The good news is they may be poor today, but the good news is that the countries of the Horn are developing quite fast, and especially Ethiopia. All these play a part. More and more factories are opening. Primark, Tesco and Asda all have clothing made in factories in Ethiopia. Companies are exploring for oil and gas, with high hopes of finding them. Education and healthcare are improving, with help from other countries. Roads and railways are being improved, and the use of mobile phones and the internet is spreading fast. So some really good news there for these countries. Ethiopia, despite not coming out particularly well in many of those different numbers on the data that you saw, certainly is improving rapidly, which is great. Okay, so based on what we've just read, on the left, we've got some of these ideas of how to improve the area. And on the right, we have an explanation, taking this beyond the simple point on the left and explaining, well, why is that good? How is that going to benefit the development of this country? And you'll notice some key terms popping up in the top one. Life expectancy, again, life expectancy in the second one, GDP in the third one. So work out what goes with what, and you just need to write this out as a sentence. You don't need to add any words. You should just run straight from the first into the second. So at the end of this, you should have the 4 points written out, leave a line between each to make it nice and clear. And I'll show you the answers in just a second, but I'd like you to think about it and give it a go first. Over to you. Pause the video. Okay, answers. Oil and gas can be used to generate electricity, so can power factories and other businesses in the Horn. It can also be sold to other countries, raising the GDP of the Horn. Yes, you can sell electricity. New factories opening will create jobs for people who could then afford healthcare, raising their life expectancy. Better roads and railways allow businesses to transport goods across the country and make more money. And better healthcare means that people can recover from illness successfully and their life expectancy increases. When people are well, they can work harder and earn more money. So hopefully that all makes sense. Check your answers, correct anything you need to, and we'll move on. Pause now. Okay, so to finish this lesson, to summarize, I said earlier I was going to ask you this question. What country is the most developed in the Horn of Africa? Why is this the case? You can use data in your answer. You're going to write a short paragraph only and try to use some of those key terms from earlier. And here's some sentence starters for you. The most developed country in the Horn of Africa is this because, well, because of what? Now, if you finish that and you've still got a bit of time, we're going to go through the answer to that, but on the next slide. But I've got a couple of other extension questions for you to think about. The data that I have looked at today makes me feel it's really important that we recognize that data, whilst it's just numbers, it can come with an emotional response, especially when we're looking at people's lives. When I see figures and facts like those, it certainly makes me feel something. I want you to have a little think and a reflection about what you feel. If you need to, go back to that data table. Go back and have a look at it. And instead of just looking at it in a mathematical way, start looking at it as a human and thinking about the other human beings who are living in these countries and what their lives are like. Answer that question. And the last one, to help improve lives in these countries, what could be done? Come up with some ideas. What could be done? What do you think is happening to improve lives in these countries? What could you do? What could other people do? What could governments do? What could people all over the world do? What could the people in those countries do to help improve lives in them? Come up with a few ideas if you have time. Pause now and get on with as much of that as you can. The bare minimum is that first sentence. Okay, so the most developed country in the Horn of Africa is Djibouti. I don't think there's any doubt there because it has the highest GDP, it has the highest percentage of people who can access safe water, and whilst not the top, the second highest life expectancy. Just having a high life expectancy but a lower GDP and access to safe water, I don't think is enough. So I'd put Djibouti at the very top. So if you haven't got that as your answer, then correct it now. The other two questions, well, I can't give you answers to that. How does it make you feel? Well, that's up to you. On one end, you might feel that it's unfair that people have to live in places of the world where their life expectancy is so low, where they don't have access to clean water. You might feel angry, you might feel guilty, you might feel all sorts of things. There's no right or wrong answer to that. You might not care, and that's kind of fine as well. You don't live there. You might think, well, these are people somewhere else. There's nothing I can do about this. It's not my problem. I think that might be a little bit cold. Maybe you could care a little bit, but nevertheless, there's no right or wrong emotion. Well, I guess there is. A wrong emotion would be, I'm happy that people are dying young. I'm happy that people don't have access to safe water. That's just cruel. That's not nice. I'm sure none of you thought that. But whatever you've written for the feeling, hopefully it's appropriate, and I'm sure it's perfectly justified. And for the last question, well, I mean, there's hundreds of potential answers there. So if you've done that last question, that is absolutely what I'd like you to send to your teacher. And the feelings one as well. That's great. Those two questions there are fantastic ones to send to your teacher. It'd be really interesting to see your views on that and your thoughts. Don't forget to justify your opinion as well. Why do you think these things? Why does it make you feel that, for example? And that's exactly the kind of thing we'd love to give some achievement points for and to get in contact with you about. So anyway, on that note, that is the end of this lesson, all about the development of the Horn of Africa. Like I said earlier, I think to summarize, not a very developed part of the world, but one that's improving and one where things are looking brighter as we go into the future. So on that positive note, take care, have a lovely day, and I'll speak to you soon. Goodbye.